I grew up in Washington, D.C., kind of near Mount Pleasant, Columbia Heights, Northwest. And yeah, it was a really kind of beautiful place. It was around the kind of 2000s. So a lot of kind of change happening in the city, but kind of grew up with a large community of kind of artists and friends. My parents were organizers in the community, kind of focused on community organizing, tenant organizing, ways of kind of affecting positive change in the city as kind of so much gentrification was happening. So, I was kind of involved in meetings and helping out and, bringing stuff up and participating in discussion and all that stuff since I was really young. A lot of Celia Cruz, my mom's Ecuadorian, so we had a lot of kind of, I don't know, like ballad or, kind of really vocally evocative music. I remember an Inti Ilimani concert that I went to when I was young that was, really formative and beautiful. And then actually also a lot of Philip Glass. My dad was really into minimalism, not in the kind of more academic sense, but in the the stuff that he could kind of find on the shelf and listen to. I grew up with a lot of plucked strings around me, a lot of percussion. Didn't kind of get into it formally, just kind of learning through community spaces or, events where like everyone would learn kind of a set of rhythms or patterns or something and explore that way. And then when I went into my undergraduate study, I had to kind of formally study an instrument, and so I ended up on mandolin. Kind of in that pluck strings stuff and learning a lot of Bach, Vivaldi, that kind of stuff. I began writing in 2013. So it was kind of just when I was starting my music study. I think I kind of started on the participatory end of it, kind of, playing with people, not really knowing what I was doing, but really curious about how I was constructing stuff. And so, like learning scales, learning roll patterns, all that kind of stuff. Also, really kind of into the banjo back then. And so as I was doing that, I was also kind of starting to learn music theory, notation, and I was also actually working in a music library. And so that gave me a lot of time to kind of look at scores, read stuff, encounter new music. I think probably 2014, 2015, after I had been writing a little while, I kind of, it was such a curious, practice to kind of really look into. I think our library at school had a bunch of kind of really wild scores from the 70s, things like fur music, where it was like literal pieces of fur in a book, and you would like rub it and try and hear it. Like from that to like looking at scores by like Nico Muhly and and Takamitsu and Ligeti and folks who I could see that they were playing with notation to kind of bring out new things. And so yeah, I think I was inspired by that, and I was like, okay, actually, like I feel like I can start to participate in this conversation a little bit. Where like when I was just learning Beethoven, I was like, I don't really know where I fit in with all of this stuff. I think that I grew up in a very creative household, and kind of creative family too. My uncles on my Irish side are all artists in various capacities. One is a composer, one is a filmmaker, one's a film producer and writer. And so that was stuff that I was really around, but I wasn't convinced until much later that I actually wanted to pursue art in that way. It was just kind of part of life. My mom is also a dancer, so that was like really in the household, and going to a bunch of events like that. But I think I resisted it for a long time. I resisted it until about college. high school was really focused on math and physics and what I kind of, maybe I was like, oh, these are serious topics, and, but of course then I go to school and I'm like, actually all of these things feel really connected. These looking at structure, looking at form, these are this, really, there are parallels in so many of our studies. I actually was a declared physics major, and the only other declared physics major in the school was also a music major. And so we ended up kind of rooming together. The school had a program where everyone on the same floor would take a class together as a kind of like community building exercise. And so that ended up being the music class. And I was like, I got super, super into it. And that was taught by the head of the department at AU. And I kind of approached her at the end of the class and I was like, I really love this. I didn't really know that I would before I kind of, stopped by. Can I like stay? And she was like, yes, like totally. It's going to be hard work. It's going, it's going to take all your time. But like, if you really want it, you can totally join us. I think I heard string quartet first in, I think probably the first year of school. There was a kind of performance wing of the performance program called Ensemble, and you would kind of go every Wednesday, and a series, like it would be everyone from the performing arts department all performing on the same thing, or then on the same little program, and then getting feedback from both teachers and other students if we had anything to say. And so we heard a lot of string quartets there, but it was definitely kind of focused on more classical styles of playing, but it was a really kind of early ensemble for me that felt, I don't know, I kind of felt like I could understand what was happening, where in other places I was like, I don't know how you're organizing this, or I don't know, I don't see the energy as much. Yes. So definitely like first on recording, right? So like part of this kind of music library background was research all the time. And so I think we had like over 20,000 CDs maybe. And so like part of it was just constantly looking through stuff. And so, Kronos has such a catalog, and we had so many of the CDs. And I think the Kronos Plays Philip Glass again, like was this like really kind of early, beautiful, it just was like almost like astounding in the brain, which ended up kind of having me see Kronos live in 2015, which was really, really fun. I think for me, part of it is that I really try to encourage creativity in musicians, and my entire kind of writing style is around ways of constructing material that people can really really kind of expand and joyously like explore. When David and I were first talking, there was this, he said something that felt like it really saw what I was trying to do, which he was saying that it felt like there was this sense of breath and space in the way in which I was kind of constructing, and that there was this emphasis on the bow as this object of breath. And it felt so like I felt really seen, and I was like, yes, that's exactly what it's kind of trying to do. And I think from that flexibility is an attempt to both kind of write really specific things for really specific groups of people, because they can, kind of drawing from their catalog and their repertoire, you can, there are definitely musical identities that I think crop up. But then also how young people can kind of play quartets and stuff has been something that I've been really kind of focused on for a few years, of like what it means to kind of have a piece that's both really approachable but also has the kind of capacity for complexity, and outshoots and growth and everything. I think the biggest is communication and perception. I find the quartet to be an incredible kind of space for exploring kind of the same material, but really encouraging deviation, personal or personal deviation from that material. So like ways in which like a single kind of kernel or cell or something can explode into possibility, and how it feels like you can hear listening. And I think that's the biggest thing that I want to encounter in performances of my work is feeling like I can hear this interpretive and perceptual process all happening at the same time. So that's the first answer for the quartet. The other one is just that there's I think strings are just some of the most amazing just instruments in general. Just being able to kind of like the harmonic series on the string, being able to get really kind of precise microtones, being able to like play with intonation. It feels like there's just like a really expansive like capacity for exploration, especially with like a homogeneous ensemble. So like the way in which you can have 12 voices, which, you know, is something that I'm trying to explore a little bit more, or one, and like, you know, there's this kind of constant back and forth of that kind of individuality of voice is really interesting. The piece for 50 for the Future kind of built off of another piece that I wrote that has been really successful in having a bunch of different configurations of strings, as well as experience levels and all of that, called Talamh Land, which Talamh is Gaelic for, or Old Irish for land. And with that piece, it's just a kind of series of harmonies, of processes, of movements from like pits to long tones to pits again, these giant arcs, or really directional things. And so in that piece, there's a real simplicity to the notation where it's just one page. It's just each kind of system is its own structure, its own kind of set of events, and having that really kind of parallel this idea of exploring landscape. And so from that, I thought, okay, what's a way that we can kind of continue that sense, and that kind of that approachability almost, so that I think one of the things is that if it's too difficult to kind of even touch, then maybe it hasn't done its job right. And so it's like, if you can touch it and feel like you understand it, and then as you play it more and more, it kind of deepens and complexifies and stuff, then I think we're getting somewhere that feels kind of, I don't know, experiential or something. And so for branching patterns, I think I had this idea that there could be just a kind of sense of a soloist and an accompaniment that kind of was in constant flux, and like was predetermined, but also was kind of developing as the piece was played. And so like having that, and then also really kind of clear structures, felt like it could be all these parts that you build individually and then put together and then kind of let open a little bit. To me, there's a huge capacity for music making that something like the string quartet has outside of traditionally notated music. That through like just looking at the same thing all at the same time, going in the same direction but at different rates or different intervals or something, that you can create really gorgeous and actually almost traditional sounding musical textures in a lot of ways. And so it's kind of, I think for me, is kind of trying to shine a light that a lot of the intuitive processes that we do as musicians are things that are reflected in traditionally notated music, and that like I think that sometimes there's like a chicken or egg thing, and everyone kind of starts with the hardest bit, and then they kind of get trapped there a little bit. And so it's like, how can we just like kind of bring it back to just like listening or just like variations on a single tone, how bow placement can activate different overtones at different times, and if everyone's doing that at the same time, there's going to be no consistency of it, and it's still going to be really musical. I have an interesting conception of that, where to me all of this stuff feels like really distinct parts that all kind of add to a whole. So like to me, like poetry is something that I read a lot, I feel a lot, I write it down. It's often either a couple times it'll appear in a score, but often it'll just kind of be this like background framing of things. But to me, that's part of composition, right? So it feels like a distinct entity. And the same thing with like a kind of really heavy visual language that occurs in a lot of my scores. But actually not this one in particular. And so, maybe next one we'll get into a little bit. But of just ways in which the visuality of a score can kind of denote gravity to different materials, to denote structure and how that can unfold. And kind of give an ecosystem of materials that can interact without kind of prescribing how they're interacting. And so like to me, all of those things are like part of this practice, but and they're distinct, but they're also like all within this kind of umbrella. And so, I mean, I think it's there's this like, are you an artist or are you a composer that sometimes people ask me to like kind of get into. And I think that they're hopefully, ideally the same thing. But B, I think like part of what I try and focus on is not just composition as this kind of like, structure of history that kind of, we're continuing off of, but is, has a kind of practice that has the capacity for other disciplines to kind of touch it and change it, and for it to like lean closer in different ways. Have fun. I think it's maybe but maybe that's, but, I think part of it is just that it's, the music thrives from creative input. It thrives from this energy that you put into it, how you're transforming, how you're warping, how you're moving from space to space or harmony to harmony. And so I think like, almost overshooting it is overshooting it and then maybe coming back if you need to feels like the a way to do it, and maybe it's also kind of my own philosophy towards stuff. I think I'm not the most like conservative person. Like I really, if I'm unsure about something, I'll think about it for a long time, but if I'm still unsure of it, I might include it in whatever I'm giving, because I'm curious how, if I'm unsure about it, sometimes I'll include something like that and someone will be like, whoa, I know exactly what this is. Or they integrate it perfectly. They engage it, joyously, like, and so, I think if you can kind of maintain that attitude towards the music and that kind of understanding that it's supposed to be blurred, but and as much structure as you put into it is going to be how it eventually comes out, how it frames, how it paces. All that stuff. I hope that flexibility, is kind of part of that rehearsal process, and that maybe then when it's kind of performance time, it'll shine through in really kind of interesting and beautiful ways. Part of it is that like there were pieces that I've written like 2.5 years ago that how they appear now is like, it feels very different from how they first appeared. There's consistency of material, of structure and stuff, but how people approach it with so many kinds of reference recordings and so many different and all valid interpretations of it, that there's a kind of ongoing construction of a kind of canon or a kind of something that's around the performance practice of individual pieces. So like I think for me, I would just like hope that this piece also has that, right? That like Kronos is going to have a really beautiful recording of it and like perform it amazingly, but that part of playing it correctly the next time is not just listening to this recording and doing what that recording is doing, right? It's like it's kind of trying to use the recording as a kind of key to understand how a set of players with as much experience as Kronos has touches an object like this.